Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Jenna loved her 6-year-old daughter Kate and would take her for a walk to the city park or the zoo whenever it was her day off. Today, they opted for the second option, which seemed preferable to them. Upon arriving at the stationary zoo, mother and daughter began to walk from one enclosure to the next, admiring the curious animals that walked around in the spacious aviaries. After the main tour, they fed the majestic swans in the pond and treated the ubiquitous squirrels with cookies, who jumped from branch to branch and amazed visitors with their agility and grace. Kate loved spending time with her mother, who was the closest and dearest person to her. She wanted to grow up as quickly as possible and become an adult. But most of all, Kate wanted to get rid of her limp, which had been bothering her for a year. It so happened that a fall from a small tree, the girl broke her leg. The bones did not heal properly, so she limped when she walked, which made her already difficult life much more difficult. Deep down, Jenna blamed herself for what had happened, and not a day went by that she didn't think about it. Oh, if I hadn't been so busy cooking in the kitchen, things would have been so different. I would have been different. The unhappy woman thought with tears in her eyes. Fortunately, little Kate did not focus on her disability, and while her dreams remained only dreams, was enjoying life and laughing infectiously as a child. Glancing from time to time at her daughter, Jenna could not hold back a sorrowful sigh. At such moments, the woman remembered herself at that age, and a wave of memories immediately came over her. Jenna's life was not an easy one, and she had good reason to think so. Remembering the difficulties of life with her ex-husband William, Jenna relived the events of those years, which left a deep, unhealed wound in her soul. In this case, it was not that before the wedding William was a fatal beauty or a seductive womanizer. It's just that in the character of the guy, there was something that willy-nilly appealed to the lonely girl, an orphan. And William, of course, turned out to be a guy and immediately drew attention to the modest beauty, librarian, aiming to get her heart for himself. William was from out of town, coming from the big city, where he had already made a big nuisance of himself to his parents. They deliberately exiled him to distant relatives in a remote town in order to dislodge their son's irrepressible arrogance and protect him from the temptations of the big city. Seeing Jenna one day at the supermarket, the guy decided not to delay the moment of acquaintance and immediately offered her to go with him to the movies in the evening. From surprise, the petite beauty was confused and quite unexpectedly, yielding to the insolent assertion of William, she agreed. That night, Jenna, for the first time in a long time, felt happy. The guy came on the date with a bouquet of scarlet roses and appeared before her as a gallant gentleman, showering his companion with a lot of compliments. The screen was showing an uncomplicated movie with a worn-out plot, but it is unlikely that young people remembered at least one frame of it, as they passionately kissed in the back rows of the theater. It was the kissing places that became the starting point in their rapidly developing relationship. So, quite naturally, after that memorable evening, William and Jenna saw each other almost daily, with each meeting getting closer and closer. Their stormy relationship culminated in a night spent together in a hotel, after which Jenna began to consider herself William's lawful bride. Unfortunately, deep down, the guy didn't share her opinion and would have preferred to continue to lead a wild, unencumbered life without a serious relationship. The news of Jenna's pregnancy for a while sobered up the lovers, who were so overwhelmed with passion. But then, William pulled himself together, and after a short hesitation, proposed to his beloved. Deep down, he did not want this marriage, but even more, he did not want to be called a coward, afraid of responsibility. Although everyone who needed to know well understood that this marriage was strictly an arranged marriage, and not out of love. It was only after starting a family life that Jenna realized what a fatal mistake she had made. It was that the girl's husband was a cruel and overbearing man who was used to command those who were inherently weaker than him. In the end, Tired of the endless nagging and claims William, Jenna ran away from him and filed for divorce, which freed her from the family tyrant. But first, she still had to share her grief with him and shed a lot of tears. Few people knew that in the depths of her heart, the woman kept a secret that was painful and unpleasant for her. 6 years ago, she almost lost her newborn daughter 2 months before the doctor's due date, and it was not the fault of the obstetricians or medical staff of the maternity ward. For the entire pregnancy, Jenna felt great and was not afraid of the impending birth, which seemed to her as something natural and inherent in every woman in the world. At the same time, the girl had to steadfastly tolerate her husband's snide remarks, disappointed by her visibly changed figure. "You are beginning to look like a clumsy cow. You're about to start mooing," said William, a connoisseur of female beauty, in anger. In the end, it was her husband's taunting that caused the girl to go into premature labor 2 months before her due date. The doctors had to fight not only for the life of the newborn baby, but also for the life of her mother as a result of the internal bleeding. Fortunately, Jenna and her little daughter, Kate, were saved. But when the exhausted mother saw the newborn baby with her own eyes, her heart ached with pity. The girl seemed so small and fragile that tears immediately came to her eyes. "Don't worry, honey. You'll see, she'll be better and healthier than any of her peers." Seeing the girl's frightened look, the obstetrician on duty said. In response, Jenna gave the doctor an exhausted smile and fell into an anxious, painful oblivion. The fact was that the woman loved her newborn baby with all her heart, and no external imperfections could diminish her maternal feelings. Unfortunately, while Jenna was sleeping, William, who more than anything else in the world wanted to see his newborn daughter, appeared in the room. But when the man realized that the baby was born premature, his lips contorted into a contemptuous sneer. "Here, you couldn't even give birth properly, you rotten vessel," he grumbled angrily, looking at his daughter. At that moment, the man was seized by anger, which subsequently led to even greater problems than he was having now. William's first thought was to give up the baby, but then, after weighing the pros and cons, he decided to accept what had happened and wait until Jenna was discharged from the maternity ward. Trying to act like a loving husband, he acted as if nothing had happened, thus once again skillfully deceiving his wife. At one point, Jenna even thought that things would get better and she would be able to live a normal family life without mutual resentment and recriminations. But of course, it was not so, and, as often happens, trouble knocked on the door unexpectedly, predictably. It all began with the fact that about 6 months after the birth of his daughter, William was fired from his job. And so, as might be expected, the shaky balance in the family came to an end. The fact was that the firm, where the father worked, little Kate, was declared bankrupt with all the ensuing circumstances. Wage arrears, the employees, of course, were not paid, which further embittered William. Jenna tried her best to support her husband, who took the loss of his job very painfully. The woman understood that in the eyes of an enraged William, the whole world was painted in black, and every other person was his enemy. "Well, be patient, honey. You know that this company is not the only one. You'll find something else. Someone like you, with arms and legs in any office will take." Trying to support her husband, said Jenna. As an understanding and compassionate woman, Jenna did not rush her husband to choose a job, giving him the opportunity to adapt to the new reality and come to his senses. But to the great disappointment of his wife, after 5 months, William not only did not find a job, but also refused to solve the problems associated with his future employment. Instead, the man sat all day long at his laptop in the arms of a bottle of something hot. At first, Jenna didn't want to see anything wrong with that, believing that her husband just needed to rest and gather his thoughts. But as time passed, William was still unemployed. At the same time, abusing alcohol, the spouse could unduly yell at his young daughter, who was playing around, or even raise his hand at her mother. Not a day went by that William did not put his hands on a bottle, And then there would be a terrible scandal in his house, with breaking of dishes and all the attendant circumstances. Why are you doing this to me, William? You know, I work part-time as a librarian, and I cannot, alone, to provide for the whole family. I sincerely empathize with you and try to help, but I'm not a magician, after all. Trying to choose words, said Jenna. But most of all, Jenna was afraid that in moments of anger, her husband went beyond all acceptable limits and did not allow even the idea that he could be wrong. Unfortunately, more often than not, a witness to William's moral decay, the scandals of his rampant drunkenness, was his young daughter, who, because of her mother's job in the mother's library, spent most of her time at home with her father. At some point, after another drunken brawl by a troublemaker spouse, Jenna caught herself thinking that it couldn't go on. That's it. I've had enough. I'm done. Let him do what he wants, but forget about me. Not only was my childhood ruined at the root, but I didn't want my daughter to have to go through something like this, Jenna thought. She took advantage of the fact that William had forgotten himself in another alcoholic binge, packed her things, and together with her daughter, left the house that was boring her. Leaving her husband, she was well aware that she was burning behind her all the bridges that bound her to the past. But on the other hand, she had no other choice. No matter what, William was the closest person to her, the one who gave her hope for something good, tender, and sincere. But at some point, sooner or later, everything comes to an end. Kate's ingratiating voice brought the young woman out of her sorrowful and extremely painful memories. Mom, can I buy some sweets? You know, a bun or a cake. Of course you can. What are you talking about? Just buy it yourself, please. You're an adult now, said Jenna with a smile, and gave her daughter some small bills. Kate readily took the money and limping to the nearest kiosk with refreshments and sweets. At that moment, the smartphone in Jenna's pocket beeped invitingly, notifying its owner of an incoming call. Oh, bad time again, the woman whispered. While talking to a colleague on the phone, the woman stepped aside and lost sight of her daughter for a while. She was not worried about Kate. It was not the first time she had been to the zoo, and she knew how to behave in such places. In the meantime, Kate approached the kiosk with all kinds of delicacies and, with her mouth ajar, began to look at the window with interest. The sight of such abundance literally made the girl's eyes light up and hungry salivation flow. Kate did not know what to choose, to take a cake with custard or a large gingerbread with jam. The girl did not have enough money for both treats, and she also had to take something to drink. Suddenly, Kate's attention was caught by the soft shuffling of someone's feet behind her. The girl turned around and saw an elderly man standing a few meters away from her. It was difficult to determine his exact age, but he looked about 70 years old. The man had a hood on his head, which served as both a hat and protection from possible precipitation and wind. The man was thin and pale, and his face showed a clear expression of longing and universal fatigue. There was an unspeakable sadness in the old man's eyes that touched the girl to the core. Kate looked at the old man in confusion, then stepped closer and cautiously asked, "Grandpa, are you sick? Would you like me to buy you that big gingerbread with marmalade? Can you see the frosting on it?" The old man looked up and looked at the girl. Then he thought for a second or two, and with embarrassment, lowered his head and said, "Thank you, honey. I'll be very grateful to you. I'm so hungry that my stomach is stuck to my back." Without a second's hesitation, Kate immediately handed the vendor the money to pay for her chosen gingerbread and a bottle of soda. The old man's eyes literally shone with happiness. His lips treacherously trembled, and his hands literally shook like a paralytic. "Thank you very much, good girl. May you have a good life, not like mine," the man whispered, and with great care, took a sweet gingerbread from Kate's hands. Not wanting to embarrass the old man, Kate went back to her mother, who had just finished talking on the phone. "Mom, can you imagine? And there's a hungry grandpa standing at the stall, with a hood over his head. Will you scold me for buying him something to eat?" The girl cautiously asked. "No, of course not. "Why should I scold you? You did everything right, daughter. Especially since I'm still going to buy you the one you picked out originally, before you met Grandpa," Jenna replied with a smile. Soon, mother and daughter were standing at the kiosk, where the saleswoman, with her trademark smile on her face, repeated the little girl's order. After that, Jenna approached the man sitting on the bench and, greeting him politely, carefully sat down next to him. The stranger had a hood over his head, so his face was only half visible. It was unclear where exactly he had put the gingerbread bought him by the girl. Whether he had already eaten it, or whether he had put it away in his pocket and left it for later, it was difficult to understand. The man looked unkempt and looked like a tramp. Half covered by the hood, the old man's face seemed vaguely familiar to Jenna, but she could not yet remember exactly where she had seen him. "Nice daughter you have. I had a daughter too, but she's probably all grown up now, and she lives in a different city." The stranger was the first to break the silence. "Yes, raising children is real parenthood. And you should go see your daughter," Jenna said with a smile. At that moment, she involuntarily shifted her gaze to the old man's chin and lower cheekbones. Jenna stared at him, unable to believe her eyes. "No, it's just an optical illusion. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. Try to figure it out," the woman thought, trying to cope with the excitement. Still unable to take her eyes off the old man's face, she literally drilled him with her gaze. The fact was that Jenna had seen that face before, and the realization of it sent her into a state of deep shock. Gaining the courage to dispel the last doubts, the woman abruptly threw back her hood and the old man's head, and was numbed by what she saw. Jenna shuddered and, shrieking, involuntarily took a couple of steps back. An older man with gray, slightly sad eyes and a strong chin on a pale, wrinkled face stared at her. He was an acquaintance of Jenna's from her former life, and so all doubts about this fell away. Not knowing what to say in this situation, Kate looked questioningly at her mother. But in fact, there was nothing to say, and there was probably no need to. Jenna's mind blurred and her thoughts flowed back, taking her back to the time when she was a mischievous little girl like her daughter is now. Memories and images merged into one, forcing the woman to relive everything that had happened. Jenna was born into an ordinary family in which her father worked as a driver and her mother was a hairdresser in a beauty salon. Her childhood was not devoid of small joys, which all children love so much in the world. Despite the fact that a lot of wealth in the family was not, her parents never deprived Jenna of gifts and tried, at least from time to time, to fulfill her desires. The future seemed so cloudless to the girl that she mistakenly believed it would always be so. Everything changed in an instant when the couple died in a cruise ship wreck that left their daughter Jenna orphaned. Since the girl had no close relatives and distant relatives did not show any interest in the girl, the walls of the orphanage immediately loomed before her. Having lost her mother and father, the girl did not immediately realize that her parents were dead and for some time mistakenly believed that they would return soon. And only when social services placed 6-year-old Jenna in an orphanage, she realized that from now on, in her life will be different. Her mom would never make her pancakes again, and her daddy wouldn't pick her up and drop her to the ceiling. Now, Jenna's new home will be an orphanage, and her friends will be the same destitute orphans as she is. But the girl could hardly have known that fate had prepared for her new trials, which would be even more difficult than the one she had faced before. Not a day went by that Jenna did not dream that one day she would be taken into foster care. But after living within the walls of an orphanage for 2 years, the girl finally lost faith in her adoption. On top of that, the older children in the orphanage knew that the first thing they did was to adopt children who, because of their age, could not remember or understand anything. It's true. I'm almost 6. No one will want to take me in now, Jenna thought sadly, not knowing that things would change anytime soon. About a month later, an older couple, both in their 40s, showed up at the orphanage and decided to adopt a little girl about 6 or 7 years old. As soon as they looked at Jenna's picture in the file, The couple said with one voice that they wanted to adopt her. James and Nancy had been married for 16 years, but had never been able to have a child. Neither doctors, nor elite clinics, nor expensive treatments helped. The only way out was to get custody of their child, which would change their lives for the better. So after completing all the necessary paperwork, James and Nancy were able to take Jenna out of the orphanage within a month. The girl loved it very much in her new family. From the first days, Jenna was surrounded by the love and care that she had not known for several years. Gradually, the memories of her biological parents faded away, leaving a few blurry images and fragments in her memory. Nancy turned out to be a loving mother who immediately found common ground with Jenna. James also kept up with his wife and was very involved in the upbringing of the baby girl. It seemed that family happiness was just around the corner, and that all it took to feel it was to reach out and get what you wanted. But as is often the case, trouble came knocking at the door at a moment when you were not expecting it at all. In fact, it was just an illusion, hiding a future of unpredictable twists and turns and pitfalls. The family's troubles began suddenly, with an event that forced them to reconsider their attitude toward life. One day, during another trip to the river with her parents, 11-year-old Jenna decided to go for a swim, and without waiting for her mom and dad, went into the water. Near splashing a gang of kids, one of whom swam beyond the limit, where to his horror realized that he could not go back. The boy's legs treacherously cramped, and his head began to slowly sink into the water. The situation was becoming critical, and had it not been for James's immediate reaction, tragedy would have been unavoidable. The man was an excellent swimmer, and within moments he had covered the distance separating him from the boy. At the last moment, James grabbed the teenager's arm, preventing him from sinking and helping him to the shore. They were warming themselves around the fire, laughing infectiously, trying not to think about what had happened a few minutes before. Pulling the teenager by the arm, James involuntarily noticed the large mole on the wrist of his right hand. "Wow, nature gave you such a gift. I guess you'll be happy," the man said. The teenager was embarrassed and lowered his eyes guiltily. Since then, they never saw each other again. That day, after such a heroic rescue of the boy, Jenna called James Daddy for the first time, and the realization of this made the man really happy. Before that, the girl had never spoken and was limited to Daddy. Unfortunately, it was the event at the river that opened a string of problems that enveloped the family in a thick veil. First, Nancy became seriously ill, and soon she was diagnosed with a formidable hereditary disease for which mankind had not invented an effective cure. Then, James began to have problems at work when the management of the firm where he had worked as an accountant in good faith was found to be involved in tax evasion. As a result, James also fell into the hands of the tax police. Because of the high-profile nature of the case, James was imprisoned on the second day of the investigation, which could not but affect the condition of his wife. The investigation dragged on for 6 months, involving more and more new defendants. Anxious for her husband, Nancy for a time forgot about her own problems and even stopped the treatment, which seemed to her useless and extremely painful. Not taking the medication was a mistake that cost the unfortunate woman her life. As it happens, Nancy died 5 days before the trial, at which her husband James was later acquitted. In fact, James was not guilty of anything, but his cunning employers had deliberately made him the culprit. James, distraught with grief, could not even go to his wife's funeral and was released after her funeral. So, by the will of an evil fate, Jenna almost ended up back in the walls of the orphanage. During this time, the girl has become very attached to Nancy and James, who have become her real parents. After widowhood, Jenna's adoptive father fell into a severe depression, from which it was very difficult to get out. Alcohol only exacerbated the mental anguish for the departed spouse. James had to go through a lot before he was able to find the strength to move on. It was not until 4 years after Nancy's death that James decided to start a new relationship. During this time, He was able to establish his own business and open a small firm selling building materials. James' new chosen one, Cindy, embodied the image of a woman who knows exactly what she needs from life, and therefore immediately considered the benefits of a possible association with a promising widower with a business acumen. Thus, by the will of fate of the villain, Jenna found a third mother, which in fact became her stepmother. She did not consider her at all native and close to her, but she was obliged to treat her with respect. And Cindy herself, frankly, did not like her stepdaughter, who seemed to her arrogant and very reserved. When Cindy came to the house, James did not stop loving Jenna, and he still considered her his own. But the new wife did not share James' paternal feelings, and at every opportunity, she emphasized the fact that his daughter was adopted. But no matter how hard Cindy tried to drive a wedge into the relationship between her husband and his adopted daughter, they still considered themselves kin. 2 years passed. Jenna had just turned 17 when an event happened that changed their lives beyond recognition. It all started when Cindy suddenly suggested that Jenna go to visit her distant relatives. Just imagine, Jenna. There's a river, a forest, the cleanest air. It's like a dream. My Uncle Frank will show you everything. He grew up there and knows every stone, she told her stepdaughter. Knowing her stepdaughter's hobbies well, Cindy had no doubt that gullible Jenna would gladly jump at the offer, and having secured the support of her foster father, the girl set out on a journey into the interior of the country to the woodsman Frank. Especially for a girl who grew up in the city, the captivating beauty of the village seemed a real paradise and universal magic. Jenna had been a guest for about 2 weeks, after which she decided to return home. But when only her stepmother met her at the train station, the girl suddenly experienced a sharp anxiety attack. "Aunt Cindy, why are you alone? And where's Daddy?" asked Jenna in surprise. At that moment, the woman turned strangely pale and then answered sharply. "First of all, he's not your father, but your guardian. Second, you don't have a father anymore. He left us and went away. And we're leaving too, to lay. I don't want to run his firm alone. I'm going to start a new life." At first, Jenna thought she'd misheard and that it was all just a figment of her imagination. But when she looked into her stepmother's eyes, she realized that everything she had said was true. How could it be? Could he have been so cruel to me? He called me his daughter, and then he betrayed me. And he couldn't just leave. Leave the house, the firm, me in the end, Jenna exclaimed. "Oh, just like that. I quit. Easy. Without too much sentiment and snot." He went to negotiate, and then he took the money and went to his mistress. "I wish he had more room, you scoundrel," said Cindy angrily. The metropolis met Jenna unkindly, and finding a good job for an underage girl was not as easy as she had imagined. Eventually, after trying a dozen jobs, she got a job as a librarian's assistant. Of course, it could hardly be called a dream job, but on the other hand, it was better than nothing at all. Cindy, having lured her stepdaughter to lay, sold the firm and the house of her missing husband in no time, not without the help of others. She didn't care what happened to James, who could get into trouble. Jenna was uncomfortable asking her stepmother about it. The naive girl believed Cindy's words, not even knowing that she was brazenly lying to her. That said, her stepmother immediately told Jenna to get a room and live separately. Cindy was being rude, but there was no one to talk her out of it. Apparently, she had been eyeing James' property for a long time, and when he went missing, she moved on to active duty. Jenna tried to find out more about her missing father, but for a 17-year-old girl, it proved to be an impossible task. Daddy's phone was out of range of the network, and after a year of unsuccessful search, the daughter realized that his father really left them forever. In the meantime, the stepmother was spending her spouse's money, who still did not let her know anything about him. As time went on, Jenna grew older and became more and more estranged from Cindy, who began to heavily abuse alcohol. Easy money did not do the woman any good, and in fact, brought her down to the bottom. At some point, Jenna even began to feel ashamed of her stepmother, becoming like a tramp from the train station. And when the girl was 20, she met the ill-fated William, who from the first minutes of communication charmed her with his assertiveness and the scope of courtship. 2 years later, the young couple had a baby girl who, as we already know, the new parents named Kate. During this time, only one incident reminded Jenna of her bitter past. Her stepmother's death did not come as a surprise to her, because a year ago, doctors diagnosed Cindy with cirrhosis of the liver in an extremely advanced stage due to excessive alcohol consumption. Treatment and expensive medication did not bring the desired result, and the woman died before her 45th birthday, just a week later. But what Cindy said to her stepdaughter before she died, she can never forget. "Forgive me, Jenna, but you should know, I was a rotten person. And now I repent to you. It won't be long now. But before I die, I want to ease my soul. James, your father, he didn't abandon us. I betrayed him. You see, a week before you came, he went on a business trip with a lot of money. I had a steady lover by then, your father's partner Nick, whom your father always trusted. I sent you to your relatives, and I gave my lover a sign to act. He slipped the documents to James to sign, and he signed them without looking, because he trusted him. The property was already ours. It was just a matter of time. Nick set up a business meeting with imaginary businessmen in a neighboring town, and he stayed home, citing illness. On the highway, James was stopped by Nick's goons, who asked for help with a broken-down car. Your dad didn't even have time to slam the car door before he got a few sticks to the head. And then I don't know what they did to him. I thought Nick was going to have the boys kidnap him and hold him for a week, but that's not what happened. I didn't find out the truth until later, and I didn't tell you. I shouldn't have. I know what I've done and how much trouble I've caused. I wasn't happy anyway, and Nick left me almost immediately, leaving me with a pittance. To say that Jenna was shocked was to say nothing. All this time she had longed for her father, even though she thought he was an irresponsible coward and a liar. And in fact, her adoptive father was himself a victim of betrayal. By a wicked irony of fate, that hard conversation was Cindy's last. She said no more and died 2 hours after meeting her stepdaughter. After burying her stepmother, Jenna tried to find some information regarding her adoptive father, but many years passed and traces of the man were lost. Most likely, he was dead and had been resting in the damp earth for a long time. And now, after all these years, the woman saw before her not an old tramp in a hood, but her foster father James, who had become her own. "Daddy, Daddy, is it you?" the woman exclaimed, and to her daughter's great amazement, rushed to embrace the old man. There was everything: tears, cries of amazement, and much, much joy that went along with such an unexpected encounter. As it turned out later, Nick's goons had not killed James, but only seriously wounded him. To make matters worse, after his injuries, the man lost his memory and was bedridden for months. He was found by locals in a wooded area near the village, and after a long period of treatment, was put back on his feet. James then fell into a terrible depression, from which he was pulled by a former chiropractor. It was he who helped James to get out of bed through numerous exercises and courses of massage. Gradually, his memory began to return, but the man only remembered his name and the town where he lived. His father did not stay in the village for long and went to the city to remember at least something else. However, severe headaches still plagued him, and sometimes at the sight of strangers stammered badly. Unfortunately, the search was unsuccessful. James, in desperation, began to drink, and over the years he became so low that he became a street beggar. Moving from place to place, he ended up in the center of the city, which, in his mind, offered a better chance of survival. He had given up drinking now, but he could no longer rewind the past, especially since James was a complete orphan, with no one but his adopted daughter and his betrayed wife Cindy, herself dead by then. And now, seeing the grown-up Jenna and her daughter in front of him, the man could not hold back his tears and was unspeakably happy to meet her. From his experiences and strong emotions, James suddenly regained his memory and remembered his entire past life. Taking Jenna and Kate by the hand, the man went to his happiness, which he had dreamed of for so long cold nights in his unheated shack. James knew that from now on his life would be very different, and no one would set him up in such a despicable way. "What about my granddaughter? She's limping," Dad asked cautiously. "It was my fault. I didn't keep track." Kate hurt her leg. It was a complicated fracture. It didn't heal properly. It left her with a limp. Jenna answered sadly. The older man sighed and involuntarily slowed his pace. Frankly, it was unpleasant for James to present himself in such an unflattering image to the daughter he considered his nearest and dearest. But in fact, that was not the case. Jenna was literally ready to carry her father in her arms, feeling guilty that she couldn't find him sooner, even though she still worked at the library. She had a part-time job and could rent a decent place to live. So, together with her father and Kate, they now had room to spare. The minute Jenna brought James into the house, and the ubiquitous neighbors immediately began whispering about it. "Look at that. The girl is out of her mind. She brought a tramp into the house. She might steal something," said the local gossip mongers. Trying to ignore them, Jenna got down to business. She filled her father's bathtub, then put a change of clothes, razors, foam, and lotion next to it. Jenna had bought all this at the store, since she'd taken William's things to the trash a long time ago. "Well, there you go. That's different. 20 years younger. If I could find a good job now, I could live," whispered James, running his hand over his shaven cheek. "You shouldn't be in such a hurry, Dad. There's still time," said Jenna cautiously. But his father didn't want to hear about being a burden on the family. Not only that, but James wanted to save up money for Kate's surgery to finally get rid of her limp. The next day, he began his search. He picked up the local newspaper with advertisements, opened it to the last page, and began to study the job search column. "So, bread truck driver? No, that doesn't work for us. Loader in a furniture store? No, not with my arthritis." The elderly man muttered to himself as he studied the ads. From time to time, he glanced over at Kate, who was playing along with Grandpa, saying, "Take your time. Look for something better, Grandpa." James was about to put the paper aside when he saw a very strange ad. "Requires a man to work as a watchman in a warehouse. The candidate's age does not matter. For all information of interest, please call the following phone number," read the man. "That's exactly what I like. I'm not afraid of work. The main thing is not to let my health down," the man exclaimed. James made an appointment by calling the phone number listed. The employer offered the man a personal tour of the warehouse and working conditions before he went to work. "Well, break a leg, Daddy," Jenna whispered and kissed her father on the cheek. James nodded and headed for the bus stop. The old man timed himself, mindful of the rule, "Accuracy is the politeness of kings." Even though he wasn't a king himself for a long time, he still adhered to the rule of never being late. The employer turned out to be a nice young man in his 30s in an expensive suit that looked great on him. "You're the one going to work. As I understand it," the businessman began first. "Yes, it's me," the man replied. "My name is Ethan. After all, you're old enough to be my father," the employer offered and held out his hand first. James had already submitted his own when he saw a huge apple-sized mole on the boy's wrist. At that very moment, the man's mind blurred, and the swirls of memory swirled him in a dance of patterns and scenes from his past. There he was, not yet an old man, pulling the arm of a drowning boy who had cramped up a muscle. The vision was so precise and clear that the old man clearly felt the slightly salty taste of river water on his lips. "Is something wrong? What are you looking at?" asked Ethan in surprise. James drew in his chest and whispered, "On your hand. Many years ago, I saved a boy from drowning in the river. He had a birthmark just like yours." Ethan's face changed, and he turned pale. You could see in his eyes that he understood what the old man was telling him. "Jesus, yes, it was me. You're not wrong," the businessman added in a shaky voice. The large tears rolled down his cheeks, and they made James' heart beat furiously. How could he have known then, nearly 15 years ago, that he was saving his future employer? Truly, God works in mysterious ways. Ethan hugged James and led him to his car. "Now let's go to a restaurant. We'll have lunch, and then we'll see what to do next," the businessman said, kindly opening the doors of his SUV to the old man. "I'm embarrassed, really. It's been a long time. What am I to thank for?" "Well, I saved the day," James mumbled uncertainly. But it was impossible to change Ethan's mind. Almost forcibly putting the old man in the car, the businessman started the engine and drove toward the center. 15 minutes later, they were sitting in a cozy restaurant, enjoying a delicious lunch, prepared personally for them by the chef. It was there that James told me what had happened to him in the meantime, when he had gotten the hang of it. He remembered to mention Cindy's betrayal and Kate's granddaughter's limp. Ethan's face grew darker and lighter as the old man went from one piece of news to the next. "Yeah, your life is a thriller. You've been through so much, but you survived and remained human." Ethan summed up the story of his interlocutor. Then, looking into the old man's eyes, the businessman said, "I think I can help your grief. The little girl has a long way to go, and she's already limping. I have the money and the connections. I'll make the necessary arrangements and pay for the operation. And for you, James, I'll give you another job. Much better than this one. You've been in business in the past, haven't you? You'll be in charge of the sales department at my firm." They've all stopped catching mice there. James sat and couldn't believe what he had just heard. His life was changing in a very dramatic way. James flew home as if on wings. After telling his daughter about his meeting with Ethan, the man literally shocked her with the news that the businessman had volunteered to help Kate with her surgery. "My God, is it really true? What a good man," exclaimed Jenna. James nodded affirmatively and brushed away a tear. He had seen many things in his life, but this was the first time. He could still see the frightened face of the boy drowning in the river, who would later become a successful businessman. Now the old man realized that if he had not saved that boy then, he would never have helped his granddaughter Kate, who was in such a bad situation. Ethan kept his word and did everything right, taking care of all the hassle of the surgery and subsequent rehabilitation. Soon, little Kate was within the walls of the best clinic specializing in the treatment of injuries of the musculoskeletal system and was looking forward to the day of surgery appointed by the doctor. Each morning, crossing off the day that had passed on her calendar, Kate drew closer to the long-awaited date. All this time, she was with her mother and Uncle Ethan, who unwittingly became involved in a whirlwind of events that originated in his past. Fortunately, thanks to the professionalism of the doctors and the latest treatment methods, the operation was successful. As the orthopedist said on the second day of treatment, Kate will dance at her parents' wedding. Watching her daughter take her first steps, Jenna couldn't hold back her tears. At that moment, she wanted to scream to the world with happiness. After so much ordeal that had fallen to her share, the woman let the tears flow, which for the first time in her life were not tears of grief or resentment. The past passed before her eyes like an express train speeding away. Ethan did not stand by and bought Kate a brand new bicycle to motivate her to get well as soon as possible. Unobtrusively, the businessman felt the problems of Jenna and her daughter, who had become family to him. By the time Kate was discharged from the hospital, Ethan had already become a true guardian angel for the Govorov family. Looking at this merry trio, James caught himself thinking that this must be the happiness that every man on earth dreams of. About 2 months after being discharged from the clinic, Ethan and Jenna had a lavish wedding, the size of which shocked many in the city. Kate, as promised by the orthopedist, learned a fun and energetic dance that drew a flurry of applause from the invited guests. Laughing cheerfully, Kate hugs her mom and dad, whom she loves more than anything.